The cold had a taste metallic and thin, like old water from a tin cup. Alara pulled the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it was useless against the bone-deep chill that seeped through the gaps in the shed walls. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of weak afternoon light slanting through a crack high up, illuminating nothing but emptiness and the faint, lingering scent of stale hay and neglect. Her stomach ached with a dull, persistent hunger that gnawed at her focus, making the shadows in the corners writhe with imagined threats. It had been 3 days, she thought, or maybe 4. Time bled together in the suffocating quiet, marked only by the changing quality of the dim light outside and the deeper ache of loneliness. Fear was a constant, coiled presence in her chest, tightening with every creak of the shed's rotting wood or the distant sound of the wind whistling across the prairie. They were looking for her. She knew it. The cruelty in their eyes, the hard set of their mouths when they spoke of her, had been etched into her memory before she'd run. Abandoned, unwanted, a burden to be rid of. The words echoed in the silence, colder than the shed itself. This hiding place, stumbled upon in blind panic, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a temporary cage, delaying the inevitable discovery. Each passing hour brought a fresh wave of despair, threatening to drown the last flicker of her will to survive. She huddled deeper into the corner, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Her fingers traced the rough grain of the wood, seeking some anchor in the vast, indifferent world outside. Thoughts of Mama, of her kind smile and gentle hands, brought a fresh sting to her eyes. Gone. Everyone gone. Just the cold and the fear remained. The air grew colder still as the sun dipped lower, and the single shaft of light vanished, plunging the shed into near-total darkness. The sounds of the night began: the howl of the wind, the rustle of unseen things in the dry grass, the distant, mournful cry of a coyote. Every sound was amplified, twisting into the footsteps of pursuers, the scraping of hands against wood. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth, biting back a sob. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She wouldn't make a sound. Just survive. One breath at a time. One endless, terrifying moment after another. Then, a new sound. Closer this time. The crunch of boots on frozen ground, slow and deliberate, approaching the shed. Her heart leaped into her throat, hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. They had found her. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself for the inevitable. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A long silence. Then, the sound of the rusted latch being slowly lifted. The door groaned open, letting in a blast of cold air and outlining a tall, broad figure against the fading light. Alara froze, every muscle tense, ready to bolt if there was a chance, or simply cower if there wasn't. The figure stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him, plunging the shed back into deeper shadow, save for the faint light filtering through the cracks. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, a silent, imposing presence. She couldn't make out his features clearly, only his general shape: wide shoulders, a hat pulled low. He smelled of wood smoke and something earthy, like soil after rain. It wasn't the scent of the people who had cast her out. Not the sweet, cloying scent of their false pity, nor the sour stench of their resentment. He remained still for a long moment, and Alara held her breath, straining to understand his intention. Was he one of them, sent to find her, or something worse? Finally, he moved, not towards her, but towards the center of the shed. He knelt down slowly, deliberately. There was a soft rustling sound. He seemed to be placing something on the ground. Then, just as silently as he had entered, he rose, turned, and walked back towards the door. He opened it, stepped outside, and pulled it shut behind him. The latch clicked back into place. Silence returned, but it was different now, taut with unanswered questions. Alara waited for what felt like an eternity, listening, her body still rigid with fear. There were no more footsteps, nothing but the wind and the night sounds. Cautiously, she unfolded herself from the corner. Her limbs were stiff and aching. She crept towards where the figure had knelt, her bare feet silent on the cold earth floor. In the near total darkness, She reached out a trembling hand. Her fingers brushed against something soft, a folded piece of cloth. Beneath it, something else. Hard, round. An apple? And next to it, a small, lumpy package wrapped in paper. She knelt down, her fingers exploring the objects with disbelief. An apple. Fresh bread. Water in a small, sturdy canteen. He had left her food. Not a trap, not a punishment. Just food. Doubt warred with desperate need. Could it be a trick? Poisoned? But why? Who was he? He hadn't spoken, hadn't threatened her. He had simply appeared and left sustenance. Her hunger finally won. She fumbled with the bread, tearing off a piece and bringing it hesitantly to her mouth. It was slightly hard on the outside, soft within, tasting faintly of yeast and warmth. She chewed slowly, savoring the simple goodness. Then the apple, crisp and sweet against her tongue. She drank from the canteen, the cool water a revelation. The fear didn't vanish, but it receded a fraction, replaced by a gnawing curiosity about the silent man and a flicker of something else, tentative hope. He knew she was here, and he had chosen not to reveal her. For now, that was enough. The man, she didn't know his name, didn't even know if he lived nearby, became a silent, infrequent visitor. He never came when the sun was high, usually in the late afternoon or early evening. He never stayed long. He never spoke a word. He would open the door, leave a small parcel of food and water, sometimes a warmer blanket or a pair of thick socks, and then leave. Alara would remain hidden in the corner, watching him from the shadows, learning the slow, deliberate way he moved, the set of his shoulders, the infrequent glance he might cast towards her general direction before turning away. His face remained mostly obscured by his hat brim, but she noticed the lines etched around his eyes, the roughness of his hands when he placed the items on the ground. He seemed weary, solitary, like her. She began to anticipate his visits, not with the paralyzing terror of the first night, but with a strange mix of apprehension and quiet longing. He was her lifeline, the only connection to the outside world, however minimal. She learned his rhythm, the faint sound of his footsteps approaching. She started to leave small signs for him, the apple core carefully placed by the door, a smooth stone she had found in the shed. Small acknowledgments of his silent gifts. He never reacted to them overtly, but she noticed the slight pause in his movements, the way his head might tilt infinitesimally before he turned to leave. A silent conversation was unfolding between the hidden girl and the taciturn man. One evening, a storm rolled in, fierce and sudden. The wind howled like a banshee, shaking the flimsy shed walls. Rain lashed down, finding new cracks to seep through. Alara huddled under the blankets he had left, shivering not just from the cold, but from the sheer violence of the weather. Fear clawed at her again. What if the shed collapsed? What if they came looking in the storm, thinking she'd be less vigilant? The door creaked open, pushed inward by a particularly strong gust. Rain sprayed inside. Alara cried out softly, a small, involuntary sound. The figure was there, silhouetted against the stormy sky. He didn't come in immediately. He wrestled with the door for a moment, then stepped inside, pulling it shut with a decisive click of the latch. He didn't leave food this time. Instead, he moved towards her. Alara flinched back, pressing herself against the wall. He stopped a few feet away, standing tall and still. He wasn't looking directly at her, but towards the door, listening to the storm rage outside. For the first time, he spoke. His voice was low, rough like sandpaper, but steady. Ain't safe out there tonight. Or in here, much. He paused, the sounds of the storm filling the gap. Got a place. Small. Dry. He didn't look at her as he said it. It wasn't an invitation, not exactly. More like a statement of fact, presented without expectation. Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. Go with him? Leave the only fragile safety she knew? The shed, for all its faults, was familiar. The man was not. But the storm and his words, though few, held a quiet conviction. He wasn't demanding, wasn't forcing. He was offering. A choice. She looked at the shaking walls, the dripping roof. She looked at the silent, waiting figure. the fear of staying warred with the fear of going. But the cold had settled deep, and the loneliness was a heavy cloak. She had nothing else. No one else. Slowly, tentatively, she nodded. He didn't show surprise, or any other emotion Alara could discern. He simply turned and opened the door again, shielding his face from the wind and rain. "Come on, then," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. Alara hesitated for just a second longer, then scrambled out from under the blankets. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She ran towards the open door, past the silent man, and out into the raging storm. The rain was blinding. The wind tore at her clothes. He was right behind her, guiding her with a hand on her shoulder, firm but not rough. They stumbled across the open ground, the darkness absolute, the wind howling like a pack of wolves. Alara kept her head down, trusting him blindly. It wasn't far, though in the storm it felt like miles. They reached a small, low structure, barely visible until they were right upon it. A simple sod house, perhaps, built into the side of a slight rise. He pushed open a heavy wooden door, and a sliver of warm, golden light spilled out. The air inside was thick with the scent of wood smoke and something cooking, savory and comforting. He ushered her inside, closing the door quickly against the storm. The interior was small, sparse, but incredibly warm and dry. A small fire crackled in a hearth built into one wall, casting dancing shadows around the room. There was a rough table, a couple of chairs, a narrow cot covered with blankets in one corner. And him, Silas. That was his name, she learned later. He didn't fuss over her. He simply pointed to the cot. "Dry off. Get warm." He went back to the fire, stirring something in a pot hanging over the flames. Alara, still numb with shock and cold, did as she was told. She sat on the edge of the cot, wrapping herself in a coarse wool blanket. The warmth of the fire slowly began to seep into her limbs, chasing away the deep chill. Silas didn't watch her. He moved around the small room with quiet efficiency, stoking the fire, adding something to the pot. He was like a creature of habit, his movements economical and precise. He was the solitary man from the shed, but here, in the light, she could see his face more clearly. Hard lines, weathered skin, eyes that seemed too old for his face, holding a deep, quiet sadness. He wasn't young, perhaps in his late 40s or 50s. A scar ran across his left cheek, pulling the corner of his mouth down slightly. He looked lonely, profoundly lonely. He poured the contents of the pot into 2 bowls and placed one before her on the small table, along with a spoon. "Stew," he said, his voice still low. "Eat." It was the longest sentence he had spoken to her. Alara looked at the steaming bowl. The smell was incredible. Her stomach clenched with gratitude. She ate slowly, savoring every spoonful of the rich, hearty stew. Silas ate his own meal in silence, sitting opposite her at the table. There was no conversation, no questions asked. Just the shared silence of 2 people finding unexpected shelter together. The storm outside continued to howl, but inside the small sod house, bathed in firelight and warmth, Alara felt a fragile sense of safety she hadn't known in a long time. The fear wasn't gone, not completely, but it was held at bay by the solid presence of the silent man and the simple act of sharing food and warmth. She finished the stew, feeling strength return to her body. She looked at Silas, who was still eating, his gaze fixed on the fire. She wanted to thank him, to ask him why, but the words wouldn't come. Perhaps they weren't needed. The stew, the warmth, the safety, they were thanks enough. The days that followed were a slow, quiet dance of observation and adjustment. Alara stayed with Silas in the sod house. He never asked her name, never asked where she came from or why she was hiding. And she, in turn, didn't pry into his life. He simply accepted her presence, incorporating it into his solitary routine. He would leave before dawn to tend to his small patch of land or whatever quiet work he did, returning in the late afternoon. Alara spent her days exploring the confines of the small house, sometimes venturing just outside the door when the weather was fair, never straying far. She helped him in small ways, sweeping the dirt floor, keeping the fire going. She watched him, fascinated by his quiet strength, his capability in this harsh, unforgiving land. He taught her small things without meaning to: how to identify edible plants nearby, how to spot signs of changing weather, how to be still and listen to the land. Her fear began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of belonging, a quiet companionship. The outside world still felt dangerous, but within the walls of the sod house, with Silas's silent presence, she felt safe. But the safety was tested. One afternoon, as Alara was gathering kindling near the house, she heard the sound of horses approaching. Not Silas's slow, steady horse. Faster. More urgent. Panic seized her. She looked up and saw 3 riders silhouetted against the horizon, heading directly towards the sod house. They weren't farmers. They had the hard look of men who carried authority, or perhaps just malice. The fear, dormant for weeks, exploded within her, cold and sharp. She dropped the kindling and ran, scrambling back towards the house. Silas was just returning, his horse laden with supplies. He saw the riders too, his body tensing instantly. "Inside. Now," he said, his voice sharper than she had ever heard it. He didn't dismount, but spurred his horse towards the house, gesturing for her to hurry. Alara darted through the door just as the riders reached the small clearing. Silas dismounted quickly, his face unreadable. He stood by his horse, facing the approaching men. Alara watched from a crack in the door, her heart pounding. She recognized one of them, the man with the narrow face and cruel smile. He was one of them, one of the ones who had made her run. "Well, Silas?" the man called out, his voice falsely cheerful. "Didn't expect to find you entertaining company." His eyes flicked towards the house, and Alara instinctively shrank back further into the shadows. "Heard you might have seen something. A girl. Went missing a while back." Silas remained still, his hand resting lightly on the saddle. "Ain't seen nobody," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The rider dismounted, walking closer, his eyes scanning the area, the house. "Come now, Silas. Little slip of a thing. Couldn't have got far on her own. Folks are concerned. Want her back where she belongs." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Belonged? Like a piece of property? The anger flared in Alara's chest, hot and sudden, pushing aside the fear for a moment. Silas met the man's gaze, his own eyes unreadable. "Ain't my concern," he said. "Mind your own business." The tension crackled in the air. The other 2 riders had dismounted now, flanking the first man. They were assessing Silas, assessing the situation. They clearly didn't expect resistance from the solitary man of the sod house. But there was something in Silas's stillness, his quiet resolve, that gave them pause. "It is your concern, Silas?" The man pressed, stepping closer. "Interfering could bring trouble. For you." Silas didn't back down. He stood his ground, a silent, immovable force. Alara watched, her breath held tight in her lungs. He was protecting her. This man, who barely spoke, who asked for nothing, was putting himself in danger for her sake. The thought was staggering. It was a different kind of protection than she had ever known, quiet, unwavering, based not on duty or expectation, but on a simple, profound choice. The lead rider exchanged a look with his companions. Silas hadn't given them an inch. There was no sign of anyone else, just the sod house, the horse, and the man. They couldn't prove anything, not without searching, and Silas wasn't giving them an opening. After another tense moment, the man straightened up, the false geniality gone from his face. "We'll be back, Silas," he said, a thinly veiled threat in his voice. "If we find you've been keeping secrets." He let the sentence hang in the air. Silas said nothing. The riders remounted their horses, their gazes lingering on the house for a moment longer, then turned and rode away, disappearing back over the horizon. Alara waited until the sound of their horses faded completely before she dared to move. Silas walked slowly towards the house, his gaze still fixed on the direction the riders had gone. He came inside, closing the door firmly. The small room felt safe again, albeit with the lingering tension of the encounter. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, for the first time. His expression was complex, tired, resolute, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He didn't say, "I told you so," or ask if she was all right. He simply nodded, a small, acknowledging gesture. It was enough, more than enough. In that moment, something shifted between them. The tentative trust solidified into a bond forged in shared danger. She wasn't just the hidden girl in his shed anymore. She was with him. Life continued, but it was different now. The outside world, represented by the cruel men on horseback, was a clear and present threat. But it no longer felt insurmountable. Alara found a new strength within herself, born of surviving the loneliness, the fear, and now the direct danger. She wasn't just hiding. She was learning to live. With Silas, she learned to work, to be useful, to contribute. She helped him in the small field, her hands growing calloused and strong. She learned to cook simple meals, to mend clothes, to live with the rhythms of the land and the seasons. Silas didn't soften, not overtly, but his quiet presence was a steady anchor. He still spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. A piece of her favorite bread saved for her, a blanket tucked more snugly around her at night when she slept on the cot, a watchful eye always kept on the horizon. He was a man of the land, weathered and tough, but with a quiet core of decency that had saved her. The harsh landscape, once a terrifying expanse of emptiness, began to show her its beauty, the resilience of the wildflowers pushing through the dry earth, the breathtaking expanse of the starlit sky at night, the quiet dignity of the land itself. She realized that resilience wasn't just about enduring. It was about finding life and strength even in the most barren places. It was about adapting, growing, and holding on to hope like a precious ember. She had come to this desolate place broken and afraid, a girl defined by loss and abandonment. But here, in the quiet solitude, with the silent protection of a stranger who had become her unlikely guardian, she was slowly, surely, becoming someone new. Stronger, more capable. She still didn't know what the future held, or if the men would return. But she knew she wasn't alone anymore. She and Silas, the girl who had been hiding and the man who had found her, were two solitary souls tethered together by chance and quiet kindness, facing the vast, indifferent world side by side. And in that shared resilience, there was a quiet, enduring hope. She had escaped not just a physical threat, but the cage of her own fear, discovering a strength she never knew she possessed, rooted in the quiet courage of simply choosing to endure, to connect, and to live.